Shelly and I have some comments that we wanted to make off the last and then get immediately into some questions. One thing that I wanted to bring up is that the core, we talked about the core muscles last week, we went into the science and looked at the anatomy and sort of the neuromuscular aspect of it. But the core also includes the muscles that connect the extremities to the core. I mean, the idea when we talk about core control is the appropriate amount of stiffness for the anticipated movement, right? So a lot of times the load in our core comes through our extremities, almost always, unless you're putting a weight on your chest or something and you're wanting to move it around. But mostly the load comes from the extremities, the head, the arms, the legs. And we could definitely put into the category of core control muscles things like the hip extensors, the psoas muscle flexing the hip abductors, adductors, the pectoralis muscles, the latissimus muscle, all of these connectors, the serratus anterior, all of these muscles are related to controlling and contributing to core control. So I think that one thing we really want to get rid of is anybody thinking core control is the rectus abdominis. I think that's, to me, that's the scariest thing when somebody says, I did a hard core workout and all they really worked was their anterior pillar in their trunk. And then they might expand a little bit and say, well, I also do obliques. But remember we said that it's all the muscles all the way around the torso, in between the ribs, the long muscles that connect the extremities to the core, all related to core control. And we have to understand where we bastardize the word control, we want to bring that word back to life. We want to bring it back and really understand control is having the appropriate amount of stiffness for the anticipated load or activity. So it really comes back, and what Shelly and I have said for years is, well, that depends. What activity are you going to do? What do they want to do? If they want to lift weights, we're going to look a little bit more like Stuart McGill's cueing. We're going to do an engagement, a bracing to be able to, and there might be some breath holding or some controlled Valsalva to be able to get a max intra-abdominal pressure while you're doing a deadlift with 400 pounds. That's completely acceptable in the training.
Yeah, I think it's also important, we just talked about this as we were prepping, that we're not to have a double negative, we are cueing the core muscles. We are cueing the pelvic floor. We are cueing all the muscles. We're just not doing it by saying, oh, now contract your pelvic floor. Now contract your abdominals, hollow your belly, navel to spine. We're not using those ways to cue the muscles. And I think maybe that's where some of the misunderstanding is. We are absolutely 100% cueing the body. We are trying to think of it as a little bit more of a system. But there are things that I will do that will get certain muscle groups to maybe be a little bit more active, but it's not at the point of, again, not talking about or not cueing anything else or thinking only one muscle has a job here, because the more you can get the whole body to work as a system, the better you are when you leave class, right? For an hour, that was great. You did Pilates, but what happens when you go out and you have to run around a soccer field? And what happens if you have to do all these different things in daily life? It's not that we're not cueing it. I think it's just we're trying to do it in a little bit more intelligent fashion.
Yeah, we were talking also before we started, and most of you that know Polestar know the phrase distribution of movement equals distribution of force. And Shelly put it into some very clear thoughts and words I'd like you to share with them as well, because I think this ties in to the idea of efficiency and how important mobility is.
Sure. It's the I mean, and again, we've, as Pilates teachers, we've all encountered this pretty much. I don't say all, but most have. Student in class, I can't do a roll up because I'm not strong enough. And you say, oh, okay, well, we'll get you stronger. And it's like, whoa, wait, you're perfectly strong. So this is my working model in my head. I've not verified this with anybody. There's been no research on it, but this is how it appears to me, that the way we were constructed, all the different joints, tendons, ligament, muscle, fascial connections, everything in our body was meant to function the way it was built to function, unless something really, significant happens, a significant surgery or something happens. We are built to move and also to be strong.
That was Eric Franklin's phrase, that we are built to move well, to function
Right.
well.
Right. And now, though, life gets in the way. So we don't move as much as we could. We move too much in a certain way. All these different things of life happen. Now, a lot of those movement places, the joints, don't move enough. Some move too much. The muscles maybe aren't so conditioned. We haven't used them in all the different ranges of motion. So now, relatively, we are weak in comparison to how we were if everything moved well. And I use the example of if you took a big, long board and you tied a string to the far end of it, and maybe it's, you know, a 6-8 foot board, and you pull on this string and you try to pull the board up to be from lying flat on the ground to be vertical. You probably wouldn't have enough strength to do that, especially if it was a heavy wood, like a big piece of redwood. If you cut it into little sections and maybe, you know, put a string through it so it's all connected, now it starts to look more like the wheel on some sort of heavy machinery where it has that, you know, it's all cut into these little pieces. Now I can pull with that same string, the first piece, the second piece, third, fourth, fifth, all the way through, and I can move that whole board. It still weighs the same, it's no different, but because there is articulation and movement, I'm only required to move a part of it at a time. And that's what's happening in our spines. If we had all the mobility, and both in the joints, but also in the soft tissue, I notice sometimes my bones and joints move okay, but sometimes I feel like just the tissue in my back just feels not very elastic, not very stretchy. So if all of that's working well, we are strong enough to move ourselves, we move enough. That's kind of how I think about it. So I think more about restoring elasticity and movement before strength, because you're already strong enough. Now, if I was going to do a roll up holding something really heavy, maybe I do need to condition my muscles a little bit more to take the added load. Just my own load of my own self, as long as we're active and move, we should be able to do that.